Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Solving Departmental Issues Using the Triad. My name is Kate, and I am a member of the Max Marketing team. If you've come to some of our earlier webinars, you've probably heard from me before. We are recording this session for internal purposes, and we'll be sending you a copy following the webinar. We have a couple different ways for you to interact with us. We have opened up polls for this presentation, so there'll be a couple opportunities to ask or to answer questions so we can kind of find out if we're all on the same page and your feedback. We also have a way to provide feedback through WebEx, which is that megaphone icon. You can respond that way and let us know if the presentation is going too fast or too slow, or answer yes or no. You can also click the raise your hand icon to do the same thing, to ask a question. And if you have any technical issues throughout the presentation, you can send a private chat to me, which is actually showing up as Chris Minich. And additionally, we do have everyone muted throughout the presentation so that noise doesn't interfere. If you do have any questions, you can ask them directly through the Q&A panel, and we will answer those at the end. I'm very excited to announce our next user conference, Max Spark. You can go ahead and get this date in your calendar now. We will be starting on February 21st with an evening reception, followed by February 22nd and 23rd for the conference, featuring a keynote speaker, a general session, 3 different tracks, and 30 different breakout sessions. On February 24th, there will be an optional training day, including 18 more educational sessions, and we will be sending out information to all users today with more information about the conference. And if you've come to any of our earlier webinars, it's very likely that you've heard from Rick before. He was formerly with Micro Manufacturing Systems, and he's recently joined us as the Director of Professional Services with all of his extensive experience on ERP. He is an APICS Certified Associate Instructor for the CPIM certification program. All right, Rick, I'm handing it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Kate, and welcome everybody to the webinar today. This is a fun little model that it really came out as a derivative of teaching an APICS Basics of Supply Chain Management course, which is really the first course in the CPIM series, for those of you who are familiar with APICS. In teaching this course at the Malvern, Pennsylvania plant for the Invisible Fence Company, we kept getting in these conversations about, well, what's the goal? What's the goal? And we ended up drawing a triangle on the whiteboard and writing in what these goals were. And fundamentally, that became the basis for this short course. That triangle we nicknamed as the Triad, just because we needed to call it something. And thus we have the Triad as the basis for resolving conflict within an organization. Geometrical shapes are commonly used in business, and this one, being a triad, is a triangle. The triangle is an equilateral triangle, which means the lengths are all the same side, the same length, or the sides are all the same length. Let's get my words correct here. An equilateral triangle where the sides are all the same length, and because of that, all the angles are equal as well. And that's about as far as into geometry I'm going to get today, because it's been a long time since I had some geometry. The goal of the triad as a whole is simultaneously improve all areas of what we're going to talk about here, and there's actually 5 different areas. But basically, we're going to improve these areas for the purpose of generating stakeholder value. So we're not looking for localized improvements where we have one improving in jeopardy of another, or maybe combinations of these. We want simultaneous improvement in all areas. So what we're going to do is I'm going to present the model here. You'll see it coming up in the next slides here. We're going to run through the components of the model. We'll discuss situations, and then we'll summarize and open it up for questions and answers. Feel free to go ahead and post your questions and answers through a chat to Chris, as the name is in PowerPoint. Kate will get them, and she'll collect them for the final session. Okay. We've been referring to this model in other webinars, including manufacturing control systems, KPI trends, even manufacturing environments. Those webinars, if you've missed them, are out on our YouTube channel. So make sure you check those out. This one will be out there with it shortly, as fast as we can get it cleaned up and processed and posted. Probably within a week it'll be out on YouTube. So let's start with an overview of this model, and then we'll stop and build it back one component at a time. So being a triad, you can see it's a triangle, and each side of the triangle holds a fundamental concern of the manufacturing control system. And you can see that they are inventory, customer service, and productivity. Because it's an enclosed shape, we also have the area inside of the triangle, and often we put in there cost objectives, especially when the accountants are involved in the implementation. And other times we put in there quality and accuracy, because cost, quality, and accuracy are all important traits of the system that will show up from time to time. Maybe not so much important as inventory, customer service, or productivity, but that can be debated as well. In the background, or around the dotted line, we have culture. And this is referring to the company culture or your organization's culture, which is made up of the beliefs and aspirations of your top management team. And we have to talk about that as well, because those beliefs or that culture can either facilitate your implementation or hurt you. They can actually harm the implementation if the owners just aren't sending the right messages and creating the right environment for it to work. What makes managing these areas so difficult is the natural conflicts, and that's really what this webinar is about, is by identifying what the areas are and their goals, and the goals are shown on this slide in terms of the arrows. The arrows pointing up are maximization goals. The arrows that are pointing down are minimization goals. So naturally, we want to minimize inventory and we want to minimize costs, but we want to maximize everything else all simultaneously. So what are some of the natural conflicts? Well, one of the most obvious, especially for make-to-stock companies, is high finished goods inventory levels for the sake of high customer service. So some companies believe that in order to have the maximization of the customer service function, we also have to increase the level of inventory. Well, that does usually happen, but that's not the recommended way of doing it. You want to minimize inventory and maximize customer service at the same time. Well, what about productivity? Long production runs, trying to minimize the number of setups, may cause other jobs to have to wait for machine time, and that will cause some inventory to decline, meaning we're not building those parts, but we're still using them, while others are being put into inventory in excess, meaning they're the ones we're running the long production runs of. And that situation can hurt the inventory position as well as customer service. Constant changeovers with response to customer requests are the other side of that. That will give you good service with poor productivity. So there's not one right or wrong answer here, but you have to look at all these at the same time. One of my favorites is the hockey stick sales curve at the end of the period, because that really makes it look good for getting the sales goal and maybe customer service objectives for that period of time, but may jeopardize the quality and accuracy because we're shoving it out the door in the last 3 days of the month. Purchasing surplus inventory for the sake of the next price break. That's another one where, okay, we're going to drive our costs down really good, but now we have 3 years worth of supply of that part. So again, these are all natural conflicts. Back in the very long time ago when I was in undergraduate school in a little school in New Jersey, this is one of the things that they emphasized to us. And at the time, I didn't think it was that important. You know, it was intro to administrative studies, and how important could that stuff be? But actually, it turned out over my career it's very important, especially when you're trying to manage an implementation of a software product that spans across multiple departments, because it's the multiple departments, each with their own natural goals, that are in conflict with the others inside of any one business organization, and actually inside of any one supply chain if you extend that outwards. So let's start and go through some of these components. There's actually 5 components on the model, the 3 sides and the items in the middle, and then corporate culture sits in the background. So we're going to start with customer service. According to APICS, customer service is the ability of a company to address the needs, inquiries, and requests from customers. And second, it's a measure of delivery of a product to the customer at the time the customer specified. And that's usually how we measure it in MACS. We have on-time shipping performance where we enter the date the customer requested, and we track our actual ship date against that. Did we meet it? Were we late? How early? How late? All those metrics show up in that analysis. One of the easiest ways to achieve customer service is to make sure you understand the conditions of satisfaction that are found within any request coming from your customer, and then to deliver what you've promised in order to meet that request. It sounds simple, but when customers make requests, I want to buy this part and I need it at this price on this date. That enters into your sales order. That drives your manufacturing plan to actually produce and ship that order, or to ship it from stock if it's there. That's a promise. It's not a best effort. It's not, well, we'll do the best we can, we'll try. The word try gets a lot of companies in trouble. It's a promise that we will ship that part in that quantity on that date, period. And we need to measure against that. Ways we can be better at increasing customer service is shortening the horizons of time, meaning decrease your lead times. Because the lower your lead times, or the shorter your lead times, the more flexible you can become. The other thing is to increase your product flexibility. You can broaden your product mix and your volume. You can also increase customer coordination. So you need to act in shared concerns with your customers and not treat them as, look what they're doing to us again this week. They pulled it up a week from where they said it was, and now we have to rearrange everything on our side in order to meet that. Customers will be customers, and we have to work with them for both of our sakes. And it's a maximization rule. We want customer service to be as high as it can as a start. If you're brand new at this, shoot for a 90%. If you're been in it for a while, shoot for 95%, and then 100% would be perfect. In reality, we're never going to be perfect. Maybe for some period of time we will be. But over a long course of time, the closer to 100% as you can get, the better. But just know that line is going to probably max out. It will flatten off before you actually reach 100% over a long period of time. So if you're doing 98%, that just means you're missing 2% of the customer requests. That's achievable in most small manufacturing companies, or doable, more acceptable, whatever the right word there is. Next, we have productivity. I'm sorry. Next, we have inventory. I'm reading the wrong side of my screen. Inventory could be for production, like raw materials, work in process items. They could be supporting items like MRO items, supplies, nuts and bolts and screws and cable ties and paint, and sometimes put it in that area. And it could be finished goods or spare parts inventory that directly drive customer service. One of the basic financial ratios that we use for inventory is the inventory turns ratio. And what that takes is not necessarily what we're selling the inventory at price, but it takes the cost of goods sold of what we sold in a period of time and divides it by the average inventory. So the more sales you can produce with the less inventory, the better you are financially. And that's just a fundamental financial ratio if you study business finance. The more you can produce, the higher your cost of goods will be. When I say produce, I'm actually speaking to sales. The more you can sell, the higher your cost of sales will be. That will justify a higher level of inventory investment. Now, what should those turns be? That varies by the size of your company and by industry. I come out of the electronics industry. Back in the day, 6 turns was a good average for a company of our size in that industry. If we were at 4, that means we had to improve 2 points just to become average. Now, if you survey most of the MACS users out there, they at least aspire to be an average company, right? Some of them aspire to be the best company, and that means they would have to be greater than 6. But again, it's a draw a line in the sand, measure what you are, and then constantly improve. any MAX organization that I've worked with that can get into double-digit inventory turns based upon their cost of goods is doing a really good job with their inventory. And that's just the nature of an enterprise resource planning system like MAX. Those who move into lean manufacturing and put some of that in place on the shop floors can get a little bit further, because that actually help you with your minimizing the inventory and maximizing that turnover. Now, how can we do this? We can increase our flexibility by looking more into capacity and not so much inventory. What that means is we don't need to stock finished goods inventory if it makes better sense to stock at a lower level, but yet have the capacity to produce it to the order. At the Invisible Fence Company, that was a major problem because they sold different types of transmitters, different types of receivers, in different color collars, which expanded the number of finished goods by a big number. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head now, but it was a big number. So what happened is we always had blue ones in stock, but somebody wanted the same thing in a pink collar. So what do? We go over, grab the blue one off the shelf, pull the blue collar out, put the pink one in, and ship it. Well, now we're off the inventory on the blue because Max thinks we have it, right? We really are showing a backlog for the pink, and it gets all messed up. So what I worked with the owners in doing is to not stock finished goods at all. Don't final pack these items until the order comes in, and it moves it to more of an assemble to order environment where the transmitters, receivers, and all the different colors are in stock. And it doesn't take long to put all those in a box. It would actually take less time to do it in the first place than it would be to go find one and have to swap things out. And that's what we did, and the finished goods inventory went down, the customer service flew way up because we were using our capacity to final assemble and ship as a weapon and not depending on the inventory to be that weapon. I hope that makes sense for you. There was a white paper I had out on the website. If you want to read that, send me an email and I can send that to you. The email will be on the last slide of this presentation here. Okay, so really cool stuff you can do in between and those. Productivity. Before we jump into what I have to say about this, we have a poll here. Which is more important? Customer service, inventory, productivity, all the above. And the poll will be open for a few minutes, so go ahead and answer. And in the meantime, we'll continue on. So what productivity is making effective use of resources by maximizing the output of a given set of inputs. As an operations manager, that's what I was trained to do. That was my job, is given this box full of resources, you have to maximize the output. And that's really cool if you like operations management. But it's not really cool when you put me in a role that has to design outside of that box because my brain hasn't been trained to think that way. And productivity is very important, knowing what resources you have and how to pull those levers and how to manage and how to get the most out of those inputs. From a capacity narrative, productivity is the product of two critical capacity measures. And those two critical capacity measures are efficiency and utilization. Efficiency is how well any one resource performs around a standard. So if we have a task and the task says it takes 15 minutes to send an email, and you give it to me, I may take 20 minutes to send that email because I'm not a very good typer. You give it to Kate, and she may get it done in 5 minutes. So Kate is much more efficient at doing an email than I am because she can beat the standard more than I can on any given day. So efficiency is a individual concern. It's actually a training issue in a lot of cases. And there was a book written called Human Competence by a guy named Tom Gilbert, who says in those situations where Kate can beat Rick by so much, we need to stop and look at what Kate is doing and then teach Rick how to do it Kate's way. Because Kate is the exemplar in that situation, and Rick needs to learn how to improve. And we can improve Rick by studying Kate. So take your best person, use that as the basis to train all your bad people or all your poor performing people. And the poll has closed, but I'm not seeing any results. Oh, there you go. And unanimously, we say D, all the above, and that's really the correct answer. Good job. Now, utilization is how well that resource is managed. That's a management measurement. So if the reason Kate is so good is because her boss is standing over Kate with a whip, then maybe that's really good management from some standards. Maybe Rick's not managed so well, so when no one's looking, he stops and reads Facebook or something instead of typing email. But whatever the case is, utilization is making sure that people actually do work for the time that we're paying them to work. Now, if you multiply the efficiency times the utilization, that gives you the productivity of that resource. And the same works for machines and other types of resources. I'm just trying to use basics example. So productivity shows up in different ways. Setting better labor standards, right? The closer the labor standard is, then the efficiency becomes easier and better to hit for the people. Training people in standard work methods, utilizing people's time better. You want to minimize the non-production periods. What used to make me very angry as a supervisor or operations manager is when an employee would come to me and say, hey, I'm out of work. Well, why did you wait till you ran yourself totally out of work before you reported that you were getting low on work? Like that's got to be trained to the people that X amount of hours has to be always in their queue so that they never run out of work. That would be the worst thing that could possibly happen, is running out of work and having to wait for another job to get kitted, which used to happen all the time until we started, putting some teamwork in place for how people are going to work together. Profit through cost reduction. We can eliminate waste and overhead. Eliminating overhead, by the way, is a huge issue in industry today. It'll be part of an undertone in our conference that's coming up in February, is how can we do things more efficiently and more productively without people doing it, without the manual touch. We can increase quality and then therefore reduce our lot size and decreasing cycle times on the plant floor. These are all productive methods. Okay, costing. Now we're moving from the three sides of the triad into the middle here. And there's lots of different aspects of cost, but really what we're talking about here is the product cost or the standard cost of your items in your system. A lot of those will be driven through the purchase costs. In most companies, the majority of the materials in the part master are purchased, and it progressively goes into fewer number of sub-assemblies and fewer number of finished goods, especially if you're in a make-to-stock environment. But cost can also be measured as an effort made to achieve something. It could be loss or penalty from gaining something. There's lots of different costs. But just for basic sake, let's think about the standard cost of a product. There's a little question at the bottom here. How much would a company's sales need to increase to get the same increase in profit as an X% decrease in cost? Okay, now this is another polling question that we're going to pop up here. And basically, this polling question is set up to be kind of like an APICS exam. There's two sections that says the basic answer is true and false. Is it less than X% or is it more than X%? And then there's four answers, A, B, C, and D, that you'll choose in your answer. So Kate can set up that polling question here in a second. So cost primarily appears on the P&L. There's direct costs as material, which are purchase items, supplies, and there's labor costs, which production employees are also a direct. And then there's indirect costs, which are all the overhead, other expenses, and management. Ways of decreasing costs are, number one, reduce overhead, like I mentioned earlier. One way of doing that is just to stop rekeying data into reports. I mean, it's very nice to use Excel for a reporting tool, but Excel needs to be linked to your database. You should not be rekeying things, from a Max Crystal report into an Excel spreadsheet for the purpose of analysis. They should be linked together, and you should be able to refresh the spreadsheet and get what you need without the overhead of rekeying that data. Doing things right the first time, avoiding rework, implementing purchase cost review system. What that means is do annual quoting from multiple sources, do some purchase price variance along the way, use cost set analysis. There's a nice multiple cost option inside of ExactMax. All these are efforts of reducing cost and overhead. And the poll is still open, so that's fine. We'll come back and answer that as soon as that closes. Also at the center of this triad, we can kind of unplug costs and plug in quality and accuracy if that's our concern, or there's nothing wrong with just leaving them all there simultaneously. Delivering products and services which meet or exceed the requirements agreed to is basically quality. And accuracy is kind of a subset of quality in a way. It's a measure of quality. But with accuracy, it's really accuracy of everything we're doing. From an ERP system, we have bill of material accuracy, we have inventory accuracy, open order accuracy, but then there's also accuracy in the processes that we're doing. So what percentage of your shop orders have to go through a rework? What percentage of RMAs are you receiving back on your product? And by RMA, I mean, the return material authorization coming back from your customer. Okay, well, that question might be a little confusing, but the poll has ended, and we have one answer. Actually, 20% of the answer was for B only, and 80% said no answer, and that was probably because of the conflicting question. But the answer is more than the decrease in cost. It's easier to decrease cost and generate profit because there's no profit margin on the cost side. In order to sell that same level of cost, sales has to be higher in cost for whatever profit margin you are or experience. So it's always easier to reduce cost by $1 than to increase sales by $1, because sales would have to increase by more than $1. If say you have a 50% margin, you may have to increase sales by $1.50 to get that same profit margin as a $1 reduction in cost. So it's a classic discussion, and there's literature out there on the internet you can look up and follow that through. And if your company hasn't been given that little presentation and taught to think that way, then you should probably do that as part of your implementation. The last thing on accuracy is probably just inventory accuracy. And there's two sides to that. There's the inventory accuracy that we measure through a cycle count, and there's the inventory accuracy we can measure through auditing transactions. A lot of reasons why cycle counts accuracy is bad or poor is because we're not paying attention to the transactions. And if we audit the transactions and train the people on how to do transactions better, then that will increase your inventory accuracy, and your cycle count results will improve as well. Okay, finally we have culture. These are the beliefs and the values of the leaders of your organization. When I say the leaders of your organization, this is your top owner. And in many small companies, the owners are part of day-to-day operations and part of the executive team. This could also be like a VP level if your owners are outside of the organization. And in a way, it filters all the way down to the members on your ERP team, if you still have an ERP team in existence. And it's the beliefs and the values of those people that make up the rules and the processes and how people are treated, and that becomes the culture of the company. Never overlook or underestimate this area, because it's clear, as a consultant to Max organizations, I would go into a company. I have one classic example of that. I can't name any names to protect the guilty, but that company was struggling, and as much money as they spent on consulting, as much training as we did, we just couldn't seem to gain any traction. And then one day, a person left. And I would say within 6 weeks, maybe 2 visits after that happened, it was a different company, because of the culture that one person was able to inflict on processes and attitudes and mood. It was like night and day. So it's really a message for top management, assuming they're not the ones that are the problem. In this case, it wasn't a top manager that was the problem. It was a lower level manager. But as soon as that person left, things changed. Maybe somebody needs to leave in your organization if you really want to change. That's the message to the management. It's like, how do you know? How do you make the assessment of how good your people are? Sometimes you can't. I mean, this person had credentials, this person had experience, but as soon as this person left, my goodness, what a difference in how this company operated. So that's why this all sits in the background. We can do a lot of things by the book, by standard practice, and it will still could either be facilitated or defeated by the culture of the company. And going back to school, I had an HR manager that studied and really was fascinated with the makeup of board of directors of different companies. She would actually study who these people are and what their backgrounds were, and even, you know, what were their hobbies. And she really got a kick out of that. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that's boring stuff. But in a way, you know, you start applying some of this in the field, and it's interesting. It really, really becomes interesting. Did I miss a poll? Looks like I did. Good job. So this poll was in some cases, I actually can't see the whole thing here. Give me a second. Yeah, in some cases, business improvement cannot be made until the culture improves. True or false? We have a 67% true on that. And the other people just didn't answer. So we're all on the same page here that business culture is very important. Okay, in this last section, we're going to just look at a few examples of some conflict that's found within the triad. So conflict objectives really comes up in the form of sub-optimization, which means instead of the whole machine operating for the good of the machine, we've got some pieces of the machine operating for the good of themselves. And it could be a machine, it could be a team, but you get the picture. And I'm sure if you go into some companies, they're all silos, and each silo has their own charter, their own processes, and they're doing the best they can to make their silo the best silo ever, when in fact what they're doing to make their silo the best is actually hurting another silo, or actually making another part of that same organization work harder because of what they're doing or what they're not doing. So it's sub-optimization. Even if you're trying to maximize in one area, you could be sub-optimizing another area and not even know it. So reduce inventory at the cost of lower service. So now, these are just like conflicts. This is just for the purpose of identifying. In no way are we endorsing these practices. Okay, so don't take this slide and say, well, these are the things I have to do. No, these are the things you want to avoid. Right? This is not an endorsement. This is not how we would recommend you run your system or your company. Okay. So few changes along production runs to maximize productivity, not good. Inventory increases, customer services could decrease if that happens. And we talked about that earlier. The reason why customer service decreases is because any one customer may have to wait for their order to get put into the production when that production is being consumed by some other part. Okay, so again, we could be increasing inventory on the part that's being produced. Inventory is being depleted on every other part, and if the customer wants that other part, then customer service is going down as well. Optimizing the number of pieces cut from a sheet of material without regard for the requirements of each of the pieces. If you have a laser cutter or a plasma cutter, a Trump machine in some cases, I guess a Trump is a form of a laser these days, but if you're trying to optimize the full sheet, you know, hey, I can put 50 more of this part on this sheet, and we will have a little less skeleton left over. That sounds like a really good productivity thing in terms of the sheet. But what about the 50 parts that you don't need because there's no demand on it for this year? It's like, well, you just increase your inventory for the sake of saving that sheet. Maybe you should have cut the sheet in half, use that second half of the full sheet as a drop, and built something else out of that when the time came, as opposed to investing that sheet into inventory that you don't need. We can decrease service levels and inventory at the expense of customer service. I don't know how many times I was told, hey, we got too much inventory, we have to eliminate it. Well, okay, we can do lots of things to eliminate inventory, but if we eliminate the inventory and we haven't worked on the capacity side to where we can put it back fast and a customer order comes in, then the customer may have to wait longer than they wanted to. That's a decrease in customer service. The opposite of that is increasing customer service by stocking more and making smaller production runs. The whole production thing goes round and round, where sometimes we're increasing lot sizes to be more productive, other times we're decreasing it because we want to be more responsive. Somewhere in there, there's a happy medium. Fundamentally, the way to address that is to look at your setup times. If your setup times are short, there's no need to do long production runs. And if somebody in your company thinks they have to, the way to combat that is reduce your setup times. If you can reduce your setup time to nothing, then basically you can change jobs over very rapidly. That's the best way to get flexibility into your system. But base that whole argument on your setup times and mathematically why they think they have to build more on a given setup time. Go ahead and work your overtime, right? Everybody needs the extra money. Vacations are expensive. Go ahead and work the overtime. That's fine. But what happens when people work overtime when we really don't need them to? They build inventory. They work off a little bit of backlog. They convert it into inventory. If that inventory is not being sold in the same time period, we're suboptimizing. Now, there's always a balance there. These things are not cut and dry, black and white, but be careful. Look at what you're doing and try to balance these as a whole. And in the very last bullet on there, reduce costs and the costs of increased inventory, because that next price break really looks good. I mean, I can get a really nice PPV on that. I'll be the hero for the month. You know, they'll put my name on the wall. But yeah, we just increased inventory because the annual usage on this part has been declining over the years, not increasing. And I really shouldn't have bought that extra price break just for PPV purposes. All right, so what did we learn? The Triad. It's a triangular shaped model, has 5 components plus the corporate culture in the background. Customer service, productivity, inventory are the 3 main drivers. Cost, quality, and accuracy are also in there as well. And then management culture sits in the background. These are natural points of conflict within a business organization. None of us can change this. This is the way business was invented. Like we're kind of stuck with it. And the more you study business, the more you uncover these natural conflicts. That's why professional business managers get paid what they do, because they have to manage these conflicts. In this case, we want all 5 components to be managed as a group, not individual goals or objectives. Now, in saying that, if you're going to go off tomorrow and start a project to improve, you may have to attack one first and then move into the second and then into the third. But do so knowing that you're going to measure all 5 as a whole, and that if you start seeing negative impacts on others because of something you're doing, it may be because of something you're doing, you need to back off and move it to a more holistic type of an approach. You want to see simultaneous improvements in all areas. And one of the webinars I mentioned earlier was a webinar on KPI trends. We published an ebook earlier this spring on key performance indicators, and then the webinar was on the concepts from that ebook. These KPIs, there's 16 of them that we started with. These are some of the critical metrics that we need to look at that would help you actually do this in real life. They're SSRS metrics, they're graphs and drill downs and pivot tables and reports right off the MAX database. So take a look at that KPI Trends webinar for some ideas of how to start this. And if you haven't gotten the ebook, again, send me an email or That's probably the fastest way, and I can send you a copy of that ebook. Okay, with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Kate, and we can answer some questions.
Perfect. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to either send them to me directly or through the Q&A panel. We'll wait a moment to start. Okay, we've gotten someone who's asked for a copy of the ebook, so we'll make sure to send it to that person. So again, if you have any other questions about any of the content or maybe something relating to what's going on for you at work in relationship to the content, please send it over and we'll answer those now.
While those questions are being typed there, I'm going to go ahead and advance the next slide so they have my email address.
Perfect. Thanks, Rick.
Just so I don't forget.
And I did get a question submitted to me that I think is meant for the group. Says, you mentioned having compassion for your fellow managers. How can you have compassion when certain individuals are playing the game for themselves and not part of a team?
Yeah, I did mention that in the white paper that we sent out. I think the compassion comes from understanding. Like if I'm an inventory manager, and I played that role before where I was materials manager, my role makes me want to do things to maximize the efficiency of the inventory or minimize the value of the inventory. Like that's my role. For me to do that and not get mad at the production manager who wants to do the long production runs, or the customer service manager who wants me to stock more, not less, I have to understand where their roles are driving them. And by having that understanding about, okay, if you're the customer service manager, you want to ship immediately when the customer order comes in. And if you think in your world that equates to finished goods inventory, then that's okay. I may not agree with it, but at least I understand it. And by understanding that, I can be compassionate for you, and we don't go head to head all the time. Now, I'm also going to use my skills to make you see it my way, that inventory is bad, especially if you take a business downturn. You don't want to be holding the inventory. If you're betting the inventory is going to be at a certain cost of goods and your business turns south, your cost of goods is going to go down, but it's going to go down a lot faster than your inventory values will, and that's going to make you look really, really bad. So you have to understand that these are just natural conflicts and that the different players all are looking for different outcomes. And I don't know, maybe it's my age now, but I have more compassion for that. Maybe it's more obvious to me than it has been before. But I think age, I think you mellow out after you get to be a certain age, and it's good to see where other people are coming from and understand that. But that's what I meant by the compassion.
Awesome, thanks, Rick. And I got another question. It says, under productivity, you discussed capacity measures. Our production people insist on building large quantities so that they look good, yet our customer service, inventory, and quality are suffering. How should we approach this?
Well, I guess the first question I would have, and we'd have to look into the data inside of your organization, is like, how long are the production runs, and look at it in terms of your setup times. If you study lean manufacturing, if you reduce your setup time to what they call SMED, or single minute exchange of die, then you could build a lot size of one, because it only takes you a minute to slide the die in, switch the machine over, and build that one. You can slide the die out, switch it over, and build another totally different part in the next minute. So it's a reduction of setup times. It's going to be looking at your lot sizes, but we need to know like what they are. Some places are highly capitalized, and it takes hours to turn over a machine. Well, that's going to warrant a long production cycle. If you're if you're building electronic circuit boards where things are more manual, the setup time may only be taking the last job off the bench and replacing it with another kit. Well, that's minutes. And if that's the case, we don't need to build 100 boards to save minutes, right? It doesn't make sense. We could do 25. Now there's also learning curves and economies of scale and all that other stuff, but you got to start somewhere. So start with your setup time and your justification that way. And if you're advanced enough and can plot learning curve effects, like it is more efficient per unit to do, say, 25 than it is to do 10, because you'll get into a motion where it just drops that learning curve down a great deal. But if your company's not enough to even have those types of conversations, then don't bring them in. Start with your setup and work from there. And one more thing, Kate, I'm sorry. At the corporate level, you have to have these conversations about the customer service and inventory and productivity all have to work together. So start having those conversations. Okay, like do some illustrations. Because production is this way, inventory is this way, and customer service is that way, and then come up with solutions to improve those. So you start thinking of it more as a whole as opposed to each individual metric.
Great, thank you. Rick, I have a question. You mentioned talking or analyzing how an individual is doing and also analyzing how a department is doing. Where do you suggest people start their focus when they're trying to figure out how to increase teamwork and increase efficiency? Should they be, looking at it as each individual or by department or what?
Well, yes, all the above. If you're tracking actual labor around a standard, then you'll get variances at the order level, and then you could break that down by the person if you're using individual employee login and logouts. But you can also just go into the department and ask your people. They'll know who the better person is for a job, even if you don't have raw data to analyze. And the whole human competence model is to take the best person at a task and teach everybody else the way they do it. And that's fairly simple, and it could be almost any task. So it can be as simple as that. Like if you want to improve your department, and you're building XYZ board today, then who's the best at XYZ board? And then watch what they do. And then take your worst person and watch what they do, and it will be obvious the difference. And sometimes it's where things are located on the bench. Sometimes it's like following the work instruction. They get lost in the paper or on the screen. They have to stop and constantly reorient themselves. It could be a whole bunch of different things that go on that actually lead to time. It could be also the person gets up and walks away from the bench more often. Because when they're not sitting at the bench, they're not productive.
Thanks, Rick.
And I highly recommend that book. It's called Human Competence by Gilbert. It's an interesting read.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions right now. But as a reminder, we always make Rick's information available. But if you do have a question, I know me personally, a lot of times I will look through material and start thinking of questions later. So Rick has been so kind to provide his contact information here, and also wanted to let me know to remind all of you that he is on the Eastern time zone. So if you do give him a phone call, please be aware of that. Don't be calling him in the middle of the night. We really appreciate everyone coming to this webinar, and we hope you got a lot out of it. One of the things that we're doing is sending out surveys after our webinars to collect your feedback so that we understand, what we're doing well and how we can improve. And we really do want to know, if these are working out for you and helping improve everything at your team. So again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you at another webinar soon. Have a great rest of your days.